St. Augustine gives a theory of beauty based on geometrical regularity. So equilateral triangle is as more beautiful than scalene triangles because of their greater evenness. And squares are most beautiful. Squares are more beautiful, and most beautiful is circle, which has no angles to disrupt the continuous equality of its circumference. Above all these, however, is the point, indivisible, center and beginning and end of itself, the generating point of the circle, the most beautiful of all figures, point. So this is what St. Augustine says. Actually, he is saying this in his discussions on the centrality of the soul. The centrality of the soul. So any material thing can be, any bodily thing can be divided. It is divisible. But soul, it is not a material thing. It's a spiritual thing which cannot be divided. So when you discuss aesthetics in terms of quantity, means aesthetic value as proportion, certain things are there which cannot be divided, which are indivisible, which is going beyond the idea of proportion. So how to accommodate that? That is the question. So this kind of theory tended to connect the concept of proportion with the metaphysical emotions elicited by the absolute identity of God. So God is absolute, who cannot be divided. Or soul is spirit. It cannot have a form with certain proportions. So in such discussions, they wanted to accommodate that discussions in the aesthetic sphere. That's why comes the aesthetics of quality. That is the point where they have the understanding of aesthetics of quality. So St. Augustine's discussion of geometric figures is in fact part of a discussion on the centrality of soul. So where to accommodate soul in the discussion of aesthetics? That is the problem. So this association of proportion, which is multiple, proportion is always multiple, it is always composite, with indivisible perfection of God, contains seeds of contradiction. So when you want to describe God, a discussion which is very limited, or a discussion which is of something which is divisible, has a contradiction. Because God is indivisible, God is absolute perfection, so you cannot have the kind of imperfection in a discussion of God. If you remember Plotinus again, he argued that beauty cannot be symmetry or proportion, because when beauty is considered as symmetry and proportion, only whole can be beautiful, not parts. So when it comes to our discussion, God cannot be imperfect or something that has less beauty with it. So God has to be beautiful, absolute and perfect. So when you try to discuss God in terms of quantitative relations, there is imperfection. It is limited. There is a sense of something that is less beautiful or not beautiful. That cannot be the case when we discuss on God. This contradiction, the medieval aesthetics was called upon to resolve between aesthetics of quantity and aesthetics of quality. So that is the point where they have the aesthetics of quality comes to their head. So one of the most obvious symptoms of qualitative aesthetic experience was the medieval love for light and color. So the qualitative aesthetic experience of the medieval period, or the people of the medieval period, can be found in their love for aesthetics of light and color. Their love and excitement for light and color. And there are quite a number of interesting writings provided to express this feeling, as an evidence of this feeling. And they reveal something quite contrary to the aesthetic tradition which we have examined already. The medieval aesthetic theorists looked upon beauty as something intelligible. As far as we saw in the previous lectures, as we understand, beauty is something very intelligible, a kind of mathematical quality which can be measured, which can be counted, which has a ratio among themselves, which has a relational value. when they were discussing purely empirical matters such as experience of meter or design of body, it's about measurement. Means about the design of a human body, it is very intelligible. But when it comes to experience of color or experience of the gems, some materials like flowers, light, gems, diamonds, and so on, the medieval people revealed instead a most lively feeling for the purely sensuous properties of things. There is a purely sensuous properties of things. A bright light, or when you see a gem, beyond the proportion, there is a quality inherent in that. So when you look at a gem, on the necklace if you have a gem, when you look at that gem, beyond the physical form, there is a quality of light which is there, which is found in that. So that's a sensual property of a thing. A flower, a gem, or different kinds of materials of that quality, or light, beams of light. There is something more than the proportion. There is something more than the measurable kind of thing. So it's a sensuous property which is found in them. And when you compare with the theory of form, theory of proportion and theory of color, the theoretical doctrine of proportion was inherited from the classical period. But the medieval period tells you the interest in color was first a practice and precept. Later it becomes a part of their metaphysical doctrines. You understand? So that the proportion, the concept of proportion and symmetry, they inherited from the classical period, and they put it into their practices. But the love for light and color, which first came as their practice, which first appeared in their practices, and later it tends to be a part of their metaphysical theories. So actually the love for light and color is a spontaneous reaction, typically medieval, which only afterwards came to be expressed scientifically within the metaphysical systems of theirs. So in order to explain the beauty of God, or in order to express the indivisible absolute nature of God, they needed something. So it gradually appeared in their practices, and later it becomes the part of their metaphysical systems. And beauty of color was everywhere felt to be pure and simple. When you take color, color in itself is immediately perceptible and indivisible. It cannot, maybe white, this is white, this paper can be divided, but the color white, it is pure and simple. It cannot be divided, it is indivisible, with no element of relational quality. So when I take a paper, the paper has a form, length, breadth, and there is a relation, there is a proportion. But the color, that is pure and simple. The color of the paper, the white, it is pure and simple, and it is indivisible. And the length and breadth can be considered, understood in terms of relational quality. There is a ratio between that. But when it comes to the color, there is no such relations which we can perceive. Color in itself. So it is pure and simple. Beauty of color is everywhere pure and simple. And if you look at the figurative art of that particular period, there are so many miniatures, illustrated manuscripts with a lot of miniatures is on from that period. And if you look at that, the color consciousness is quite different from that of the later periods. So the figurative art of the period shows a very different kind of color consciousness from the succeeding centuries. So it is confined to simple and primary colors most of the time. And you don't find the techniques of sfumato, chiaroscuro, unione, or cangiange, those kinds of techniques which becomes very popular during the Renaissance period is not found in that period. Very simple colors, primary colors used in its purity. That there are, any color would have different shades, but that shades are not used in order to show the gradation or in order to bring in the effect of light and shadow. So that they maintain the purity of that color. So that color means immediacy and simplicity characterize the medieval love for light and color. So there is a kind of chromatic decisiveness opposed to sfumatura, or the technique of sfumato, which you see in Renaissance period. Da Vinci and most of the Renaissance masters were using that kind of techniques. So that is not found in the medieval miniature paintings. Instead, what you see is a chromatic decisiveness. When they use green, they draw a green leaf and they fill it with green color. Simple. And that chromatic decisiveness is found. There is no gradation, there is no light and shadow, because the color in itself was considered to be beautiful. So they don't want to affect the beauty by making that gradation. In sfumato, even beyond the edges, the color spreads. But in medieval period, when you look at the miniatures, it is confined. It is limited within the edges. It doesn't spread outside. And also in poetry, we can find some of the examples in poetry, in literature. In literature also, in poetry also, the colors are so decisive and unequivocal. So grass was green and blood red, milky white or snowy white. Okay, so that kind of decisiveness is found with regard to color. And there are superlatives of color also. For example, Prior Bicuda, that is a color of rose. It's an extreme color. Prior Bicuda. It's a Latin for the color of the rose. Prior Bicuda for roses. And white color may have many different shades, but it was never allowed to fade into or blur into shadows. And the medieval miniatures testify this love for integral color, the vivacity of chromatic combinations. So we will look at some of the and there are different texts. I will give you the names of the texts. So I am sharing a screen and you get the names are foreign languages. French, Trust, which is that's a prayer of the hours. That's a book which they used to pray. And there is a 11th century Reichenau Gospel, Reichenau miniatures, is Bible. And the last one is Arc et Enide or Arc and Enide. It's a French poetry. By Chertin D. Troyes. So means these are certain literatures, certain books which is with illuminated. These are the illuminated manuscripts which is available from that particular period, from different centuries. This is a page from the calendar of Trust Richest Hours showing the household of John, Duke of Berry, exchanging New Year gifts. So if you look at the color, the use of color in this painting, and you compare it to the Renaissance paintings, the high Renaissance painting. In the early Renaissance, you would find it. Okay. In the early Renaissance period, you would find these kind of color schemes. But when it is high Renaissance, it is all changing. So the color is used in its purity. If you look at red, the wall, there are designs and all, but that light and shade effect is not shown like that. When you look at blue, the clothes, the blue is a vibrant blue and no other color or no gradation is shown. In Kanjande, they would use a different color in order to show the shade. If you look at the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Michelangelo, if you look at the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Michelangelo is changing the color. When it is a green cloth, he uses brown in order to bring the effect of shadow, or red in order to bring the effect of shadow in some of the paintings. That is called Kanjande. That's a Renaissance technique of painting. So such things are not found in these paintings. This again another one from the same manuscript, Man of Sorrows. In certain parts, certain gradation is found. Still, that purity of color is maintained in most of the places, most of the areas. When you look at the river and the background scene, you will find certain gradations there. But generally, it maintains the medieval principles. This is the book which I was showing. It's a romantic poetry completed in the 12th century, and one of the it is famous for the illustrations. You go to the text. Set off by this all-pervading golden sheen, such eminently cool, bright hues as lilac, sea green, sand yellow, pink, and bluish white seem to shine with their own light. So this is a text, and in this, see the paintings, and I'm referring Umberto Eco, Art and Beauty and Art in the Middle Ages, and he refers to all these texts, and according to him, the very text and the painting, the representation of color in the text and the artistic reproduction of that text is found in the miniature in the same way. The color sensitivity is found also in the literature. The same is found in the painting of the miniature. The painted miniatures in the text. So the use of gold, the use of primary colors. So the color sensitivity of that particular period is also found both in the text and also in the paintings. And this one is another text. I will show you one more text. I am just showing you this in order to know how the text and image are parallel in the medieval European art history. The parallel between the text and the paintings. So there are literary evidence of the connection between lively visual imagination of the poet and that of the painter. So there is parallel that is found between the painting and the literature. So I have highlighted the text which is significant to us. The colors, the diamonds, gold, ruby, hyacinth. Hyacinth is a kind of flower. It's a brightly colored flower. I think there are different colors available. So indigo, vermilion, dark blue, white, green, blue, and yellow. So that's the text. You just go to the text. The one who went at her behest came bringing to her the mantle and tunic, which is lined with white ermine, even to the sleeves. At the wrist and on the neckband, there was in truth more than half a mark's weight of beaten gold, and everywhere set in the gold there were precious stones of diverse colors. Indigo and green, blue and dark brown. And continues, the mantle was very rich and fine. Laid about the neck were 2 sable skins, and in the tassels there was more than an ounce of gold. On one a hyacinth, and on the other a ruby, flashed more bright than burning candle. The fur lining of white ermine never was finer seen or found. The cloth was skillfully embroidered with little crosses, all different: indigo, vermilion, dark blue, green, blue, and yellow. So here is a image from that text, and I think this is it's a different image from the same text, and you will see the same kind of image. It's a hunting scene. King Arthur chasing a white stag. So it's an illumination from that manuscript. This is another one from the same text. So you see how the colors are used. What is narrated in the literature is very much comes into the painting also. So there is a connection between lively visual imagination of the poet and also the imagination of the painter that is found in this literature. And in medieval literature you find too many examples for this. In the fascinating account of the late medieval sensitivity to color, Huizinga records the enthusiasm of Froissart for the splendors of the decked-out fleet with its streams, gay with blazonry floating from the mastheads and some reaching to the water. And we look at different literature. You will see, you go to the text and find out the fascination for colors in literature. Les Blessons des Colors, which praises the conjunction of the pale yellow and blue, of orange and white, orange and pink, pink and white, and black and white. So the conjunction between these colors is being illustrated in a passage. It's another one. Olivier de la Marche, which describes a lady dressed in a violet colored silk on a hackney covered with housing of blue silk, led by three men in vermilion tinted silk and in hoods of green silk. So colored silk, violet colored silk, blue silk, vermilion tinted silk, hoods of green silk. So the color becomes dominant even in literature. So that is the color sensitivity of the medieval period. Why? So these colors have some indivisible quality, a perfection that is more close to soul. It cannot be divided. So these references to popular taste are necessary if you want to fully understand the medieval theories of color as a source of beauty. So the medieval people considered color as a source of beauty. Sometimes you may find in a text, things are called beautiful when they are brightly colored. Some of the writers will be giving us such text. So when you find a text like that, things that are brightly colored are more beautiful, or the more brightly colored they are, they will be more beautiful. Don't think that it is childish. It is very shallow kind of argument. Actually, the philosophers of that time is sharing the sensitivity of that period. The philosophers or scholastics of that particular period, they adhere to the color sensitivity of that particular period. They are very much influenced by the sensibility of that time. So, color as a source of beauty, you have to understand how the medievals looked at color as a source of beauty. The popular love for color was deep-rooted and essential. And if you are ignoring this, we will be tempted to think the statements like things are beautiful when they are brightly colored as puerile and superficial. Very shallow kind of statements. So we have to understand the color sensitivity of that particular period, and we have to understand that the philosophers of that time were also influenced by the color sensibility of that period. And they had also symbolic meaning. Color had a very symbolic meaning sometimes. Sometimes mystical or sometimes psychological influence of the colors were understood by them. So I will give you an example which Umberto Eco provides us in his text. So green, for example, green. According to Hugo Saint Victor, green was the most beautiful of all colors, a symbol of spring and an image of rebirth. So what you find in this text is a sort of mysticism. So they find green as a symbol of spring and of rebirth. We know there is no actual relation between these. Or scientifically speaking, we may not be able to agree with it. But it becomes a symbol in a mystical way of rebirth, and also it's a symbol of spring. So he considered green as the most beautiful of all colors. It is true that there was an element of mysticism in this, but that does not negate the element of sensuous pleasure. So green he considers as the most beautiful of all colors. There is a mystical element in that, but certain people may like green the most. There is a sensuous element of sensuous pleasure also found in that. And another one, William of Auvergne, his argument was more psychological. So green, he said, lies halfway between white, which delights the eye, and black, which makes it contract. So it is more about a psychological or physiological understanding of color. How green is looked at. What is the impact of green in our psyche? So this is a different understanding of color of the medieval people. And another important aspect is, we were speaking about color. We have to also understand light. We said aesthetics of light and color, or color and light. So when you luminosity was something very important. Luminosity, lumen. Lumen means light. The effulgence of the sun and fire. The sun is luminous. There is an effulgence, means it emits lights. It emits light from it. Fire also emits light. Apart from single colors, the philosophers and mystics alike were enthralled by the luminosity in general. So they were excited. They were fascinated by the luminosity in general, especially of the sun and also the fire. The luminosity of the fire and sun was very fascinating for them. The medieval literature is also filled with joyous acclaim of the effulgence of daylight and of fire. In the medieval literature also you will find the same. Like you saw about colors, about light, about the effulgence of sun, and also about the effulgence of light. You will find evidences in medieval literature. And if you look at the Gothic cathedrals, a very basic structural principle of Gothic cathedral is that the effect of light should be erupting through the open fretwork. So if you look at the Gothic architecture, you will find there are too many stained glass windows which emits light, which allows the light rays to pass through. So a basic structural principle of Gothic cathedrals was that they should give the effect of light erupting through an open fretwork. I already referred to him, Albert Sugar. He writes in one of his versicles, "The church shines with its middle part brightened, for bright is that which is brightly coupled with bright, and bright is the noble edifice which is pervaded by a new light." So it was of this marvelous uninterrupted transparency that Sugar wrote when praising his church in one of his versicles. "The church shines with its middle part brightened, for bright is that which is brightly coupled with the bright, and bright is that noble edifice which is pervaded by new light." So, having light inside the church, brightening the church, interior of the church, bright coupled with bright, and it pervades, and it is pervaded by a new light. So important was light for them. And I will give you some images also. You look at the interior. I don't know how it is visible on your screen. This is the nave towards the entrance and towards the choir. Look at the wall. Almost except the columns, rest of the portions are covered with stained glass, and it allows sunlight to come in. And because it is passing through colored glass, so vivid will be the effect of color inside the cathedral. Actually, in this photograph, we are not able to understand it correctly. If you go and be in the place, if you go and be in such a cathedral, you will find it. We have some cathedrals, some churches, Gothic churches in Kerala, exactly the copy of certain cathedrals in Europe, which was built even before independence. So, if you come there and if you visit it, you will understand how the light functions in a Gothic church. You are welcome to see those things. So anyway, see, this is another image. I don't know how it is visible for you. How the light falls on the wall and colors the interior. It colors the interior. So it is brightly colored and bright coupled with bright. And you just imagine the effect of light to a man who is inside, to a person who is inside. Again, the same cathedral, Saint Denis. This is the open fretwork, means which allows the light to come in, open fretwork. The open fretwork of the cathedral allow sunlight to come in, and when it is coming in, since it is passing through colored glasses, it gives you a very different effect of light. I'm showing too many images because I wanted you to have a idea. Even if you are not going there, you have to imagine when sunlight falls, how it will be affecting the interior. And also in poetry, you find more examples like this. In Dante's Paradise, it is a perfect example of love of light. Dante's Paradise. In part, an expression of the medieval spontaneity, the medievals often conceived God in terms of light. So why this light becomes important? Also because the medieval people had understanding of God as light. So light has an effect of beauty in itself, and rather than that, very often the medieval writers understood God as light and regarded light as the original metaphor for any spiritual reality. So light becomes a metaphor of God. Light becomes a metaphor of all spiritual realities. And it was also partly influenced by the patristic scholasticism. So during the early fathers, like Saint Augustine, they also have glorified light as a metaphor of God. Even in the sacred scripture, in Bible, New Testament, you find Jesus Christ says, I am the light of the world. So Jesus, who is the second person of Trinity, he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever walks in me will not walk in darkness. So I am the light of the world. So that metaphor of light is very often used in Christianity. So very often the medievals conceived God in terms of light, and light was the original metaphor of any spiritual reality. And in Dante you read, and lo, all around me, equal in all its parts, a splendor dawned above the splendor there, like a horizon when the new day starts. So the significance of light is very, very evident in Dante's Paradise. And it is not something that is Christian alone. That also you have to understand. It has got an ancient pedigree, conceiving light or sun as God. It is not exactly Christian. It is found in many other religions. If you remember the ancient civilizations, Baal in the Semitic religion, in the Semitic paganism, Baal is a personification of sun. And for the Egyptian religion, Ra is a personification of sun. And Mazda of Persian civilization is the personification of sun. And they have 5 temples. The Zoroastrians, as the Parsi religion, they got 5 temples. Fire is something important for them. So the effulgence or light becomes a metaphor of God. Okay. So this has got an ancient pedigree. It is not something that is Christian alone. So the image of light as God had an ancient pedigree from the Baal of Semitic paganism, from the Egyptian Ra, from the Persian Mazda, all personifications of the sun, or the sun's beneficent action to the Platonic sun of the ideal ideal, the good. So in the Platonic understanding, the sun sun has got a beneficent action. Sun's beneficent action to the Platonic sun of the ideal, the good. So in the world of ideas, sun has got a prominence as the good. So that concept of sun, the image of that image is passed on to Neoplatonism through the writings of Proclus. So the Platonic ideal of the sun, it is passed on to the medievals through writings of Proclus in particular, and it entered the Christian tradition through Saint Augustine, and also through Pseudo Dionysius, who constantly praised God as lumen, fire, or the fount of light. So Pseudo Dionysius is another author. So Pseudo Dionysius was somebody who praised God as lumen. Lumen is light. God as light, fire, or fount of light, the source of light. And with St. Augustine you find this idea. With Pseudo Dionysius you find the same idea again in a different manner, in an elaborate manner. Yet another influence of the later scholars was Arab pantheism. There are Arabic scholars like Avan Pache, Hayben, Jodhkam, Ibn Tafayl. If you remember the Andalusian scholarship, you will be remembering these people. I don't know if you have learned it. Andalusian scholarship was an important reason for Renaissance. And when you try to understand the Andalusian scholarship, you will come across these Arab scholars. Avan Pache, Hayman Jodham, Ibn Tafail. These people, they pass this vision of the glittering essence of light and its ecstasies of brightness and beauty. And in their literature also you find the importance of light. There is a way of looking at light as the truth, or light as the way to God, or light as the miracle of God. And it has got a mystical value. Color has got a mystical value. We saw the example of green, and white sometimes is considered as the color of purity. Red is considered as the color of martyrdom. So these colors have a mystical significance. And in itself, these colors and light are beautiful. And whatever that is beautiful is found as something of a glory to God. So it's glory of God. If you look at Plotinus, we already saw Plotinus. In the first Ennead 6 tractate on beauty, chapter 3, he writes something. So he writes, Plotinus, God as light, mentioned by Plotinus in his writings. So there are two quotations I have given. The beauty of color is derived from a form that dominates obscurity of the matter, and from the presence of an incorporeal light, that is the reason of idea. The beauty of color is also the outcome of a unification. It derives from shape, from the conquest of darkness inherent in matter, by the pouring in of light, the unembodied, which is a rational principle and an ideal form. So you have to understand this. The matter is the principle of evil. It is absolute darkness. Light is the principle of good, and it is the absolute good. Okay, so light is something that the beauty of color and light it is unembodied. It does not have a body. The beauty of color and light, it has no body, and it is something that makes matter beautiful. So that you have to understand. And to summarize our discussion, I will give you a few points. According to the medieval understanding, to conclude our discussion, God's light gives splendor to whole creation. God's light gives splendor to the whole creation. And God's light allows the beauty of the objects to become illuminated. So without light, you can see anything. So beauty is the light is the principle of beauty. God's light allows the beauty of the objects to become illuminated. And God's light allows display of their beauty to the fullest. And light, therefore, is an important condition for there to be beauty. So if there is no light, there is nothing beautiful. And Pseudo-Dionysius says, and what of the sun rays? Pseudo-Dionysius says, and what of the sun rays? Light becomes the good. The good also praised by the name light. So this could be a conclusion for our lecture. And I have a few more images I will show how they treated beauty. This is the Hagia Sophia, which was in use, and how it allows the light to come in, how it is lighted. Look at the dome, and at certain times of the day, when the light is coming in through the windows on the top layer, which is close to the upper dome, you will feel like the dome is suspended over the church. So that kind of light effect is found in the Hagia Sophia, which was built as the Cathedral of the Holy Wisdom. See the light falling in. This is the dome of the Hagia Sophia, the most striking element in the structure. And you will feel like the dome is suspended when the light is very strongly, brightly coming in. You won't see the connection between the dome and the wall. So you will feel like it is suspended. And the dome was built by Antony and Isidorus. So that is the aesthetics of light, and we have concluded this session. Do you have any questions? So there is aesthetics of proportional symmetry, aesthetics of light and color that we saw, and one more part is left, aesthetics of symbol and allegory. Aesthetics of symbol and allegory.